songwriter, event producer, and founder of Eye on Life, a youth empowerment project that focuses on interconnectivity and connecting youth with indigenous wisdom and knowledge. Influenced by 19 years of entheogenic study, his work is a synthesis of art, spirituality, and science, with a passionate emphasis on community building and the evolution of human consciousness and potential. His most recent projects are Evolution, a youth empowerment symposium created in collaboration with the Esalen Institute, Big Sur, California, and I Am Life, youth journeys to Peru and Ecuador, Amazon, to bring youth face-to-face with the Quero, Aymaran, and Achuar people. Yes. I'm sorry for mispronouncing all this. Visit Tony's website at tonymoss.me. So in this presentation, Tony will share his thoughts on the impetus for the growing global popularity of ayahuasca, its challenges, and its connection to the phenomenon of the Eagle Condor Prophecy. So please help me welcome Tony.
Well, first of all, I'm always way more interested in being in conversation than talking. So talk probably won't be all that long because there's a wellspring of amazing beings here and I want to hear from you. And we have the advantage of having Rock here, and I've been so enjoying your Shamans of the Global Village, by the way. It's like, plug for that. If you want to check out Shamans of the Global Village. Really check it out. Yeah. It's such an amazing, beautiful time right now to be a part of this renaissance, and it really is what it is. 22 years ago, I was running a coffee house in Long Beach called Living Planet. It was the first all-organic coffee house in that area, I think in Southern California, actually. And one day, this friend of mine pops in and he says, hey, there's an ayahuasca ceremony this weekend. Would you guys like to go? Me and 2 other people. And back then, like everybody else, I said, what? I'd never heard of it. This was pre-internet for me, which is hard to believe at this point, because it's like I'm locked to it at this point. So there was no research to be done. And I went really because I was at this, it was kind of my own personal renaissance during that time period. You know, I was somebody, one of those rare people who's at their first ayahuasca ceremony, the only altered state of consciousness I'd experienced was ganja, and that was every now and then. But the clincher was, he said, oh, have you seen that movie Emerald Forest? It's like that. And I had just seen that film and I loved it. I'm like, yeah. So I'm picturing we're going to be like out in the forest. I'm going to meet my spirit animal, you know. And because of that film, I thought it was going to be Blown Up the Nose, which was actually Hape in the film. But they altered it. I later read a book about it. So we go, and it was in the hills of Sierra Madre. And we go into this big room. And I'm kind of thinking like, oh, maybe this is like the holding place. Then we're going to go into the forest, right? And then in walks the Santo Daime people. And Santo Daime, as was now known as ayahuasca church in Brazil. I never heard of it, had no context for it. So they come in and they all have the little, like, their fardas on, they call them their uniforms, you know, and my first thought was, oh shit, it's a cult. I got tricked. Yeah, so because of that, you know, and there was no orientation, it really colored my experience. So I was one of those people that I did the first drink and quote unquote nothing happened, you know. And I'm getting more and more irritated with the songs and this whole experience, and you know, and they're doing rattles, and the whole thing was just like, you know. And it's funny now, being a facilitator, I meet these people all the time. I was like the worst case scenario for any facilitator, any kind of ceremony, and. So much so that I finally sneaked downstairs in this lodge we were in, and I get on the phone during the ceremony, big no-no, and I'm calling a good friend of mine. He's like, what are you doing calling me? I'm like, man, I got ripped off. I paid 40 bucks, 40 bucks. And nothing's happening. And he's like, wow, that's really weird. So right around that time, one of the guardians catches me, as I like to say, and I'm like, dude, I gotta go, the Nazis are here. I mean, really terrible. So we go back upstairs and he goes, well, we're going to have the second drink. So I'm kind of waiting in line and getting more and more irritated with the entire experience. And have the second drink, and if you don't know in the Santo Daime, it's, you know, you sit in chairs with all the lights on. So on top of everything else, you know, I'm sitting here, and they had told us, don't cross your legs and arms. So I'm really not having it at this point. So finally, really just kind of defiance. You know, just after the second drink, I cross my arms, cross my legs, and I lean over, and my head explodes. And here I am today, 22 years later. And even after that experience, I mean, you know, it was, the funny thing was, within a day we were saying like, wow, that was an amazing experience, but we're never doing that again. And then a week later we get a call, hey, there's going to be another ceremony. I'm like, okay, sign us up. And that kind of love-hate relationship, which a lot of us have with that medicine, went on probably for 2 or 3 years of not really enjoying and fighting against the uncomfortable aspects of it, but noticing during the weeks afterwards that shifts had taken place, right? So I began probably within 2 or 3 years of that. By the way, I had no idea the world of shamanism related to ayahuasca existed at the time. Right? Again, I wasn't like researching. And I didn't even know that the Santo Daime was religion. I was just in love with the idea. By then, believe it or not, I had fallen in love with the songs. So I was going because I love the sense of ceremony and ritual, which I've always liked. You know, certainly I was getting benefits from the medicine, and I started to meet all these amazing people. So that's why I kept going back. Then I met Don Jose Campos, who then was unknown, relatively speaking. You know, now he's one of the appropriately rock stars, I think. A friend called me and said, hey, Don Jose is coming to town and he needs a sitter. You know, and we recommended you. And I said, sure. You know, so there began, unknowing to me, my study in what we now call shamanism. Of course, he's a curandero. And that's what actually started opening up my world and me realizing that something really powerful was happening, not just in my personal experience with ayahuasca, but in the world, you know. The whole concept of plant medicines, entheogens, you know, psychedelics being used for something other than tripping, it all came with the advent around meeting him and starting to see what was possible, basically. Yeah. So the interesting thing is I was thinking about this talk tonight is we could not have had this talk 22 years ago when I started. Because to have a talk now about ayahuasca, you would actually have to talk about neurobiology. You'd have to talk about neurogenesis, epigenetics, neurotheology, transgenerational healing, and to some degree, quantum physics. You know, all of that now is in the conversation of ayahuasca, certainly in the world of entheogens and psychedelics in general, but specifically ayahuasca, because it is amazing to work with that medicine and to understand it or want to understand it, and I think to want to be effective at reaching its full potential in terms of offering it to people. It's gotten to the point where you really have to take on all these subjects, right? And so my study probably around 10 years ago was that. I decided like, wow, if I really want to take this on, because I started to lead ceremonies, I was a leader of the, this is an ironic twist of that story. 10 years later, I was the leader of the Santo Daime Church in Santa Barbara, which is no longer there. And really quite by default, you know, got dragged in kicking and screaming because someone else was leading and there was a mutiny, which those of you that have done this work laugh, there's always a mutiny, right? And the community was like, that person shouldn't be leading. You know, we want you to lead. And I was like, whoa. Yeah, so once that happened, I started to feel this grand sense of responsibility. And there began my actual deep study into not only plant medicines for spiritual work, but what we now know as psychospiritual work. And wanting to understand, if I'm going to do this at all, I want to know what it's doing. I want to be able to talk to people and have a deeper understanding of not only what's possible, but how best to get there, which kind of comes down to best practice. And that's the exciting part of this renaissance, which it is what it is, you know, that we're in, is that it came from the MAPS conference, and I went to the World Ayahuasca Conference in Brazil, and it was so exciting to sit there and hear, to some degree, for lack of a better term, to hear validation of everything that the shamans, the curanderos had been saying all those years was happening, right? To actually have that backed up by Western research and both empirically, I think, by researchers and from actual hardcore research. It's like, this is happening in the brain. It's like, oh, that explains why people are having this experience. So it was really exciting for me. So because of that, that wide range of subjects, that's not what we're going to be talking about tonight. And fortunately, we have Joe here. If there's any questions around those things, you know, ayahuasca meets neurobiology and epigenetics and amazing things, we can have that, because I'm way more interested in the conversation we'll be able to have. But what I wanted to share was actually a phenomenon that rose in my own life during the process of working with ayahuasca. What I have seen in the West, you know, is there is this dying like hunger and almost desperation for people to have authentic experience. And clearly that's a result of living in a culture that is founded on capitalism, you know, / consumerism. And that is the dominant culture being exported out to the rest of the world. And although Western medicine, is phenomenal in what it has brought to the world, at the same time, it has largely failed us in terms of bringing healing, like what we now know as whole healing, holistic healing. And I don't doubt the medicine itself, meaning Western medicine. It's Western medicine meets capitalism, and this is our issue, right? So in looking at that and wanting to have a deeper understanding of it, and be able to speak to that in some way, there began this study. So 10 years into I've told this story before, and it was really a turning point for me, not only in my life, but in this medicine path. I was invited to an all-men's ceremony out in Joshua Tree, and with the Santo Daime group. And we're underneath this huge oak tree, there's a fire in the middle, and we're doing the battles, and we're singing, and I'm just having the best time, completely blissed out. And the whole time we're singing, I'm aware that there's somebody next at my right that's not singing, right? And at some point in that altered state, I realized that every person who came on the trip was actually accounted for in the circle. I'm like, who the hell is next to me? And I look up, and it's my father who had died 5 years earlier. As vivid to me as he is, as I am to you. With the distinction of, if I looked at him directly, I couldn't see him. The second I would turn away, he'd be right there the way that you're in my peripheral vision. And there's this moment when he said, okay, now that I have your attention, I would like to have a talk with you. Let's take a walk. And I laughed to this day, because only in an ayahuasca circle would this happen and be normal. I said to the leader, excuse me, my dad's here and he wants to have a talk. And he says, okay, just make sure you stay in visual distance. We want to be able to see you. So I walk off a bit into the desert, and I got to this old, it looked like the remains of a ranch entrance gate or something like that. And he says, look, the reason we brought you here, and as he said that, my grandfather, his father, and my mother's father appeared. Equally, again, visible, but kind of off to the side. He said, we brought you here because we want to apologize for all the pain and suffering that we caused you growing up. He goes, and the reason, and as he said the word reason, I was transported in one of those beautiful, the Santo Daime calls impetus, the visionary state. And I saw slaves in Africa running through grass fields, being chased by either other Africans or, I call them slave herders. And then there began this fast montage of seeing them being captured, thrown onto ships, all that suffering in the crossing of the ocean, landing here, and all the pain that they endured. And then boom, 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 right down to my father, and his family growing up in the 50s and 60s. And I saw so clearly, of course that's the way they treated me growing up, because they didn't know any better, right? In that there was this huge healing, which now we know as transgenerational healing. I had no language for that at the time. We now understand that all of the traumas of our ancestors are encoded in our DNA somewhere. And the phenomenon about ayahuasca ceremonies is that it comes up, right? So there I was in this moment, and intuitively, after first of all getting really, really angry, so much so that this wood thing I was leaning on, I snapped it, And I realized that I had needed to have that experience. I wanted to probably my entire life. And in that, I intuitively knew, I called each of them forward and I said their full names and I said, I understand and I forgive you. And one by one, they vanished. The effect of that was the week afterwards, and another beautiful concept that is relatively new, I think, that we have given the world of ayahuasca traditionally, is the concept of integration. I had no one to talk to about that experience, and for me it was like being on the planet for the first time as an authentic human being, without a story pushing me, right? Without every action actually being fueled by some kind of past trauma or hurt, right? And so it was really wow, I'm kind of authentically in this body. I don't even know how to relate to people. And it took about a week or so, and that led into this huge depression, which happened, I was 40 years old at the time. And it's interesting now because these things, all these things I would laugh at now, I really give a second look to. This idea of Saturn return, where it turns out right around that 40th birthday is the second time that should be swinging around for a guy, which we call midlife crisis in the West. So I had the great fortune of being able to pretty much lock myself into my house for 3 weeks. And I pretty much just kind of moped around, hung out in the window seat and read Rumi. That became my Bible. But I tell you, in that, the very simple revelation I had, I really was looking at human suffering and I thought, wow, if I look really closely, very plainly at it, that fundamentally, the cause of all of the challenges humanity is facing right now is a lack of connection, right? Plain and simple. Yes, you can build up from there, and there's all kinds of ramifications of that and fallout, but underneath it, that's pretty much what it was. And the interesting thing is that I'm looking, wow, our ancestors, indigenous people, had that connection. And clearly, maybe not all of them, but by and large, probably by default, from just empirical observation, they realize, yes, we're connected to Pachamama, we're connected to all life, we're connected to the cosmos, and therefore we have to kind of move accordingly. And that was certainly absent from my life. It was absent from, I think, I didn't see it basically reflected back to me anyplace, right? So that began a new level of my journey. I became completely committed to this idea of building community, building connection, and the evolution of human consciousness. And in that period, I discovered, it is in ceremony, traditionally, it's in ceremony where indigenous people impart the values of their culture. It's where they share the cosmology. So I began experimenting with this idea of community rituals that were not entheogenic, but just driven by us getting together and sharing our values, basically. So that pretty much led to everything else that I was doing. And eventually led me to this beautiful phenomenon called the Condor Prophecy, which a lot of you are familiar with. For those of you that aren't, very simply, roughly 500 years ago, indigenous elders, probably the prophets and spiritual leaders of those communities, gathered their people and they said, we're about to go through a really difficult time. They foresaw coming the colonialism and the genocide that would come with that. And they said, this is going to last about 500 years. But don't worry, at the end of that time period, this America splitting, which is what they called it, the eagle and the condor will fly again. Then it's become the kind of dictate and Bible for my life in a lot of ways. Surprisingly emotional, wow. And I'll share why. So the eagle represents the north, which is masculinity, the way of the mind and technology. And the condor represents the south, femininity, intuition, and the way of the heart. I've never done a talk been this emotional. It's really surprising, so give me a second. And it's cool because I'm realizing in this moment, again, it's this concept that keeps anchoring me back into this work and why I do it. So I'm looking at humanity as we're racing towards the edge of this cliff. If you look closely, the only way our species is going to survive is to bring together the heart and the mind. I've often said that the mind, untempered by the heart, conceives of an atom bomb, builds it, and drops it. The mind, tempered by the heart, conceives of an atom bomb and explores the technology and figures out how to put it in service to humanity in some way. Wouldn't build a bomb, certainly, and would not drop it. And enter this beautiful phenomenon, ayahuasca. Isn't it fascinating that right at this time period, when we are racing towards this cliff, that out of the jungles of South America emerges this organic technology, which is what it is. And as I mentioned earlier, not only does it bring together, offer, I think, this deep sense of connection, both to community, personal connection to self, to the planet itself, obviously the cosmos. It opens up this whole amazing, beautiful merger of spirituality and science. And that, again, we have to have conversations about epigenetics and neurobiology. What's it doing? Why does it work? That you can't separate the medicine from the ceremony. And those of you that have done the ceremony a lot, or have explored ayahuasca, you really can't. There's something so beautiful, phenomenal about the medicine itself and a good ceremony, a well-conducted ceremony, and there's many, many of them. That combination has been, as far as I've seen, the most potent agent on the planet for evolving consciousness and bringing about this transgenerational healing, which is crucial because there is no, that I'm aware of, there's no culture on the planet that hasn't suffered some kind of genocide, some war, some famine, right? And a lot of philosophers and researchers that I've studied over the years have said, yeah, this is probably why Western people are so violent, because we're born into it. We're all children of some form of, slavery, genocide, suffering caused by the hand of other, that we've had to some degree, learn to protect ourselves and kind of reinvent the tribe, not the tribe as a larger community that you are part of and support, but tribe as these are my immediate people and I don't really go outside of that, right? And in that we get a lot of feudalism. So that prophecy for me perfectly describes metaphorically, if not realistically and specifically, exactly the time period that we're in. And I believe that it is the fuel, it's the foundation for this renaissance that we find ourselves in. This wanting to return to not only a profound sense of connection and authenticity and meaning in our lives, and deep holistic healing, but also this sense that there is something not quite right with the world, right? And that we're all separate. And underneath that separateness, wanting, I think, everybody desperately wanting to have true, authentic connection. It's one of the phenomena of ayahuasca that it brings all those things. And it's almost like, at this point, it's almost like a sidebar and a bonus prize that it also heals, right? Yeah, because most people at this point aren't going to ayahuasca ceremonies because they have any physical ailments. They're going, it's interesting, people contact me all the time wanting recommendations on where to go to do a safe and trusted ceremony. And I always ask them what their intentions are. And it's never physical healing. Certainly depression, we put that in a category. Depression, anxiety. It's generally this sense of, there's something to the effect of, I've been feeling this calling for a while, I have this emptiness inside, I feel like there's something out there that I'm not quite reaching. That's what's motivating most people at this point to seek out and attend ceremony, which is exciting, And I was looking at the Beckley site today, and there's an article I didn't have time to read, but the title was, "Is Connection the Cure?" Mm-hmm. Yes. I was delighted to see that. I just kind of skimmed through it. And yes, a lot of the dis-ease we now know that people are feeling, physical dis-ease, is certainly connected to this sense of isolation, depression, anxiety, disconnection from our body, and probably, I think the cosmos in a lot of ways. So it's exciting again that ayahuasca, and again, we could bring in, San Pedro and peyote and other things if we wanted to, mushrooms, but we're talking specifically about ayahuasca. There is, again, something so beautiful about the synergy of a good curandero, or a good facilitator, probably more likely in the West, with the ceremonies as they have been modified for Western people, which we'll talk about, how potent that is and how quick it is. I said earlier that the ceremony I went to 22 years ago didn't have an orientation. They instead passed out this little copy of an article that was in Shaman's Drum. And the thing that really struck me was, it was I think it was a Santo Daime Padrino that they were interviewing. And he said verbatim, there is nothing that wouldn't happen in the normal evolutionary progression of your life that wouldn't happen in a ceremony. However, 10 years equals 10 minutes. And that's the truth, yeah. And interestingly enough, that time frame, 10 years, I've heard so many times over the years. Someone just recently, it's a film or something I was watching. The person said, he said, I've been seeing a psychotherapist for 10 years. I'm firing her tomorrow. All I needed was a ceremony. Okay. Yeah, and that is an experience that people that work with ayahuasca in terms of facilitation experience over and over again. So that's a phenomenon. And it's an endless study because now that I understand and have a grip on what is happening in the brain, in the state of neurogenesis and all of that, and synaptic connections and everything, what doesn't get explained is why is it cross-culturally that people have the same visions? Why is it always a quote-unquote spiritual experience, by and large? My first ceremony, sure enough, I saw a huge serpent. I had no research, no background, didn't have the internet, and I was seeing things that I now read and see in Pablo Amarillo paintings. And the Santo Daime Church in Japan, there's quite a few of them, and talking to people there that had done nothing prior to it and hadn't studied, they report the exact same visions, And that takes us into the work, of the psychology in more Jungian terms. Like, it's amazing to think that regardless of the culture, there are these shared archetypes. There is this realm of archetypes that somehow we tap into that is key to not only, I think, our understanding of ourself and our place in the cosmos, but ultimately in terms of our healing. Understanding where we are in the context of history, where we are in the context of our own ancestral, probably, development, and how all of that is connected to physical healing is an area of study that I'm just kind of diving into and really excited about. And because of that, I'm super stoked to have Rock in the room and Sita and Joe, because ayahuasca's gotten very popular, as you know, and it's kind of the wild, wild west still. But when I was at the MAPS conference, the most recent one, Sita and I have a long history, and we did, what was the official name of the conference?
Visionary Convergence.
Yeah, because I always wanted to say something else, Visionary Convergence. And then watching Rock's work, and Joe, by you and Gerber Mate, my favorite talks, whenever Joe speaks, I always feel like he's one of the few people that everything that comes out of his mouth, I resonate with, And the reason is you're one of those perfect examples, actually all three of you, of this Condor Prophecy. Taking what we know about Western sensibility, what's happening in the West, Western culture, science, and then also respecting and honoring and studying the tradition. Both its spirituality, its cosmology, and its therapy, and how it actually is used to heal. And I get really super excited about that. So I really want to jump into a conversation. So the last thing I want to share, actually, before we do that, because what you're going to share is actually what I'm most interested in again. What I most commonly hear from people on a regular basis is ayahuasca actually an entity? Is it actually a spirit? Right? And are the beings that we meet and the realms that it takes us into real? And I always have the same four-part answer. For number one, what is real? Right? Really. The second, I'm kind of rephrasing that. I think, one is it real? I think ultimately what I end up saying when I cut through the other two is, if it works, does it matter? And that's what I've learned over the years, meaning we don't have to fully understand it, and I don't think we will. No level of, that I'm aware of, at this point in my own development, no level of scientific understanding of what ayahuasca is doing in the body and the brain is going to explain the experience people have of meeting a relative or a deity or themselves or Pachamama, or the cosmos in ceremony, and the profound healing that catapults from that, and why that healing also reverberates into the communities of people that come. That intersection, again, which is kind of ego condor, is what I'm most interested in. And I think, it's the part of this work that the West has brought to ayahuasca. And I think something that, actually the last thing I want to share, which is something that I really am fascinated and fascinated by and I love. As far as we know, ayahuasca wasn't being used traditionally as a tool for psycho-spiritual work, right? People were going to curanderos to be healed. And the curanderos would drink ayahuasca, and they would use that as a way to kind of scan you and diagnose. And your diagnosis may or may not have been taking ayahuasca, right? It's the onset of Western tourism that ayahuasca, as it is conceived of in Western culture, it is the onset of Western tourism that brought ayahuasca into being as we see it today, right? So I'm separating that from traditional use because there's a lot of mystery around that. People have been saying for years that it's 5,000 years old. There's no evidence of that at all. As far as we know, it goes back like 300 or 400 years maybe. Again, in terms of how we understand it being used. But ayahuasca today, an ayahuasca ceremony, when people conceive of one, that happened with the West. And what I love about that is that it is our tradition too, right? In that we can absolutely see ego condor. What Western research and the mindset, the understanding of the mind, how it works, psychology, all of that, and our own history of ceremony and how that works. That mix with what is and was happening all over South America, and now it's happening more and more in South America. You're very likely now to go to a quote-unquote traditional ceremony in South America. Sit in is I think that is a renaissance that we're in, and that is to me what the Eagle Condor is all about. And that's it. What I would like to do, because it's a rare opportunity to have so many people in the room that have such beautiful experience with this work. And so, Joe, unless you're leaving, questions that come up in terms, because it is really exciting what's happening with the understanding of epigenetics, neurobiology, neurotheology, all of that. And I'm no expert in any of those fields. I just study them because I have a sense of responsibility to. But there are people in the room who have as much experience, if not more, than I do in those areas. So if anything comes up that feels appropriate, I want to be able to defer and just basically have a council. So if you're in this room at all, you are aware of and a part of this renaissance that is taking place. You know, so let's get started.
I would love to know what it was that made you feel emotional.
I think it is the having, anybody that's paying attention, I think, to what's happening on the planet realizes the severity of it. You know, for the first time in human history that we know of, we actually have the potential to self-extinct, you know, and could theoretically wipe out most life on this planet. And being someone who early on, even prior to really taking on ayahuasca as something that would be like in the forefront of my life, I was a political and social activist, you know, and out of that I really became concerned with like the state of humanity, just becoming an adult. I have not seen anything, as I said, more powerful in its ability to heal people, both transgenerationally and bringing them back to that sense of connection and to awe and wonder and re-enchantment with life than ayahuasca, right? So with that, there's always a sense of profound kind of responsibility, and if not urgency, right, with the maintaining what we call right relationship, which we also get from indigenous people. The idea of being in right relationship with plant medicines, and the concept of ceremony and healing people. Particularly because there's this amazing popularity that within that, of course, is a small percentage, and I do think it's small, a percentage of abuse, you know, and misuse. And those of us that have been around for a while, we have these conversations, you know, like, this is one of our main concerns, you know. It's exciting, on one hand, to see the popularity of plant medicines resurging, absolutely. And with that, again, I kind of think the downside, maybe, of the shadow of the ego condor, is that that renaissance is happening right in the midst of consumerism and capitalism run amok, you know. A friend of mine just yesterday told me on the phone, because we're planning a concert in Las Vegas, and he said, man, you know, 2 years ago, everybody and their brother wanted to be a yoga instructor and a life coach. Mm-hmm. He says, now everybody I meet wants to be a shaman and host ceremonies, and they're talking about plant medicines. And, you know, and a friend of mine just also 2 days ago said that combo came up, and she goes, oh my God, everybody and their brother in Santa Barbara is doing combo, and every fifth person I'm meeting is a facilitator, right? And of course, you can go buy a combo kit online, proclaim yourself a combo facilitator, and start working with people, right? So there's a beauty in that we're re-owning these ancient technologies and working with plant medicines, and there is the downside, obviously, is that yeah, there's no training, you know, and it's happening irresponsibly, and people are being hurt. You know, we hosted the Huni Kuan in Joshua Tree a couple years back, and to my surprise, it was the first time that we actually offered combo in a public setting, basically. And from that weekend, 3 people got really ill and 2 went to the hospital after their combo sessions. Mm-hmm. You know, and I remember feeling like, to one degree, really proud of the way that we handled that. And on the other hand, I'm like, wow, what the hell am I doing offering this medicine that is so potent and powerful that is sending people to the hospital, and the guardians for that weekend didn't even understand what a seizure was and how to deal with it, right? So light bulb went off in my own head. It's like, you know, I'm pretty well versed in ceremony and how to manage things that come up in ceremony. But again, these powerful medicines that, again, were developed in a completely different consciousness, you know, indigenous people, suddenly meeting people in the West who, or basically who knows what state of consciousness, you know what's in their bodies, where they're at when they come to ceremony, you know, which is why the fielding of that is so important, like who comes to ceremony. I suddenly saw a more profound sense of responsibility. I go, wow, people that I work with actually have to go do CPR training. Who knew, right? Renaissance that we're in, while being, very, very aware that there's a shadow side to it for sure. That everybody involved in this, movement is tackling and having conversation about.
I don't suspect we're going to answer the question, but I want to go back and talk a little bit about the symbolism, about archetypes, and the psychology involved, and maybe advance kind of an opinion I'm sure a lot of people share. My personal experience has been that the plant is sentient. It's alive. It has a consciousness. We may just be at the precipice of understanding and being able to share space with this consciousness, but it knows a lot. And I wonder, it's not a coincidence, is it, that right at this time of crisis on the planet, this thing that's been standing around for a few million years observing,
right,
is trying to give us a message. What's been slithering up it for 100, 300,000 years? Snakes. I mean, we're going to see what it comes into contact with, right? But all of my work with the plant has been it's all started with a little preliminary phase where I have a very pronounced vision of little vine beings, little whatever we kind of call them machine elves. There's all the different names for them, but it's a sentient little thing that's coming and probing and trying to see what does this person need today. I'm curious if we're overthinking it. One thing that seems to happen, we're having this rebirth experience. There's something to that's really, really important, but yet we're trying to overpsych it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, if I had given the full answer to people asking me, is it real? Number two is always, who can say, right? Whether you cognize ayahuasca as just self, being able, chemically, the plant just allows us to tap into our subconscious and have a conversation with ourselves. That's valid. Maybe, as Jeremy Narby says, to some degree, maybe it's in our DNA, and somehow through light transmission, we're able to, go into a cellular level and beyond. Again, there's this beautiful thing about epigenetics and transgenerational trauma and healing. And then there's the idea that it's an actual beingness of itself, which is the one I think I just like the most, because that's the way it always appears to me, is this idea of ayahuasca being Pachamama, being the mother. There's only a couple of tribes that I'm aware of, the Secopa being one of them, that doesn't conceive of ayahuasca as feminine. There's a couple that perceive it as masculine, and I think at least one that doesn't perceive it as either. It just has a whole cosmology around it. But by and large, it's pretty much experienced as divine feminine. Madre. It's just really beautiful. The thing about the archetypes, someone once asked me, many years ago, I remember back when I was really being divine still, I was in ceremony and I was having this kind of one of these moments where I'm in the visionary state and saying, okay, if this is real, how come everybody's not experiencing the same thing? Why isn't everyone in the room in the same place and being, And sure enough, ayahuasca, boom, clears the way out of this visionary state. And the answer I got, which I really liked, was, you're dealing in a language, of course, is a construct. In the realm of quote-unquote spirit, we don't have very developed language for these concepts in the West, so excuse me if I get woo-woo for a minute. In the realm of spirit, of subconscious, there is no language, right? So if quote-unquote spirit of the planet or higher self wants to communicate with you, the most effective way is going to be archetypes, and it's going to be the archetypes that you most resonate with, right? That have the most potency for you. And it turns out many, many times in ceremony, actually in the sharing circle, that people are having the same experience, but it's coming through very different visions or, archetypal kind of situations or actual beings. So I think in ways that we're still exploring, ayahuasca communicates in the realm of subconscious, which automatically brings us into the realm of archetypes. And that's new for me too. And I've read a few people commenting on that recently, which I really like. But it's about as much as I can share about that. But this is one of those times when I get to ask Sita and Raka, what do you think about that? This idea of, is it real, and to what degree? Basically that. To what degree do we think what we're experiencing is actually real in terms of an entity being there, an intelligence being there, or archetypes showing up?
Right. Big question.
Big question.
it's one of the perennial questions that always comes up.
And like you, how many times, I said, this can't be.
Right.
And I think it's really good for me personally to maintain my critical faculty and to constantly be in that place of questioning, right? And not be enchanted by my own imagination or be enchanted by my own visions, let's say. At the end of the day, I can speak to my personal experience, and that is that the plants have spirits, that there is the capacity for trans and interspecies communication, and that's what's taking place.
Yeah.
I think that when I'm able to get out of the small thinking and out of my head and into the felt sense awareness, I'm able to experience that. And so if that is interpreted as real, then yeah, it's real. But like you, is it real? Is it not real? Is it a, it isn't so relevant, but is it, a spirit? It definitely, there are spirits, and definitely there is communication, and definitely there is capacity to cultivate ability to have that kind of communication that is non-linguistic, but that also, for me, supports my ability to take my place as a good citizen of the universe and all of its many manifestations of source, whether it be plant or animal or insect or rock or water or any number of the things that exist.
Yeah, the number 3 on that answer that I normally answer is it's experienced as real. Right? And I think that's a distinction that's really valuable for people in the West. That's why I ultimately say it doesn't matter if it works. When you're in that space, as all of you know that have done it, it is absolutely experienced as real. And it's certainly experienced as, the world of psychedelics in general, they use this phrase. It's experienced as more real than the life that we're living, right? So in that, it's why it's so potent, But Rock, I would love to hear your take on that.
Well, you sort of said it already, and there's different points to riff off. But I think for me, interesting enough, we think of ourselves as discrete entities, in our ego individuality, going through these experiences and plugging back into this interspecies communication. Think of it from the other angle of the planet or even beyond the planet as source consciousness. What is it that we're plugging into, this reconnection? And if consciousness or spirit or intelligence and that loving presence of source is manifest in all things everywhere and is broadcast at all times, but we've had an ego filter block from receiving the signal, and the plants are mediating and tuning us in, and the frequency of the ancestors is there too. Everything's in the Akashic field, all time as one. Yet this moment, and it comes back to the eagle condor things, this prophecy that we had this moment of disconnect. And for us, it's 500 years or longer in his story, but in geological planetary time, it's a moment, right? But how do we reconnect? How do we recognize this transmission of information and reunion when also we have these blockages? So it seems to me there's this cascade, and there's this cultural process we're going through that is definitely eagle condor, and it's just begun, because if it's being broadcast, this signal of consciousness and this potential to reconnect and be optimized almost, first it has to get through the blocks. And we've had just very short generation or so of ayahuasca, specifically in plant medicines in the West. And it feels to me that what they're doing is resetting the system, they're recalibrating the system, as many of us as it can, because of the urgency. But then it's sort of saying, it's not the finger that points at the sun. It's not about just the plants. The plants are saying, come back to the garden, or come back to the relationship with Pachamama that you are part of. Because in the collective, this is the interspecies communication. They're trading not just information, but they're trading energy. And they're mediating us to come back into this awareness.
I love that, because there's this, classic and kind of famous story of, a group of anthropologists doing field work and asking all of the different, they call shamans, how did you know to combine these two plants? And they all had the same answer, the plants told us. From a current Western perspective and consciousness, that makes no sense at all. But anytime, any of us that have spent, more than a month and like camping, and something happens to our consciousness, where suddenly you're walking and you do perceive the forest a lot differently. And I can absolutely see someone who has grown up in the jungle that has a completely different kind of consciousness and is involved in some kind of interspecies communication. We have to assume that exists because it's plausible. Yeah, I could see them kind of looking at the plants one day and thinking that they needed a new medicine, and these two kind of like stand out. Maybe that's what they're referring to. And you combine them and lo and behold, you get way more than a purgative. Yeah, so I'm very fascinated by that. And, but I want to have Joe answer this question first. I'm particularly interested because, Joe, again, you bring in a real strong, beautiful Western sensibility, and you have your center, and this must come up all the time, this idea of like, one of the things I was interested in when I watched the interview of you I haven't had a chance to read your book, I can't wait. I liked so much that you were in that interview speaking really firmly from a place of a doctor, but also having to concede, and also you have to do dieta and manage all of this onslaught of visionary states, and yes, I'm wondering for yourself, how does that show up? But what do you think about this idea, like it's an entity and a being?
I think for me it's like, in the West, struggle so much with admitting that they don't know what's real.
Right.
And that's what the whole story is about.
Yeah.
And it's like, what if I say mystery is real?
Okay. Good point.
Okay. Mystery is real. In other words, part of the whole like figuring it out involves me telling, basically, ultimately, this is the academic world, at its peak, is like, this guy, I always like to say this, I understand your argument, I got it. You're right and I'm wrong.
Right.
You don't need to say anymore. I think I got it now. You know and I don't know.
Right.
So you know and I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a conversation.
It's not a conversation. In other words, well, it's just spirits, and it's a plant, and that's what it is, and so for me, it's like, it's not about convincing anyone of anything, what's real. Like for me, I think that's a misstep. So when people come to the center and they say, I'm introducing it to them, it's like, okay, and we want to walk them down that road where it's like, hey, we're gonna encourage you to get into a dialogue.
Right.
With this experience. For us, we're going to talk about it like the plant and the spirit of the plant, and those are the words that I'm going to use to talk to you, And just like I might talk about something else that we don't really understand all that much, but we have words to talk about it with each other, And so then I tell them, hey, you know what? I couldn't ask you to believe that you're going to talk to a plant spirit, I would never try to convince you of that. I'm like, a lot of people that come through the program, they end up with that. A high percentage end up with that experience. So I'll have to leave that to you, for you to go through that and see where that gets you.
Exactly.
But it's not for me to tell you. Real is so personal. It's so personal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, what's going to be real the moment you die? All the papers, all the ideas, all the concepts. Or is it going to be like going through this experience with your dad?
Yeah.
And how much, and that's what I say, it's just like, so then in the Western, the way I put it into the Western experience, for in these terms of the book, because it's like people they're so comfortable with the mystery, they don't want, even though it's everywhere, even though there's no way around it, even though it keeps coming up, they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to experience it. They don't want to admit that they are an actual, like, miraculous expression of that mystery.
Right.
That we don't even understand how I'm talking to you right now.
Exactly. And that I can receive it.
It's so arbitrary, okay? It's so arbitrary, this frontier of what's real and what's not real. It's so culturally arbitrated, This culture tells you, this is what I always talk about. It's okay to talk about superstition and at the NBA finals, but it's not okay to talk about it in the science discussion.
Yeah.
It's okay to talk about how, Tony Moss makes me feel when I'm hearing his music, and how it moves me and all the stuff and the energies involved in that. And so many of us can share about that. But then in these other, scenarios, it's not okay to talk about that.
Yeah, and again, and I think partly that phrase I used earlier, we don't have very developed language in the West for talking about things that is second nature to a lot of indigenous cultures because they live with it. And because so much of it has become cliche, I understand why people have a lot of distrust and caution the minute you say anything at all that sounds mysterious and quote-unquote woo-woo. But at the same time, I'm fascinated these same people have really strong religious beliefs, right? Or will say something that is purely superstitious, right? Yeah, so it is personally arbitrated all the time what it is we're accepting as real. It's fascinating to me.
And that's why I think the emotional side of things is such an important part in the Western discussion. Because we can talk about the way somebody their personal experience of talking to a deceased loved one and everything that happened, and they could go through this debate of was it real or not real. But the emotional thing that happened.
It's real.
That when you are brought to tears reviewing this stuff and everyone feels it, it's something that even the most Western person can relate to. So I think the emotional process associated with the spiritual experience is where we can bridge it.
Yeah, that's why, in the end I say it doesn't matter if it works. It's exactly what you're talking about,
But does it though? What if we're getting the message wrong?
Well, here's the thing.
I mean, I know the plant's not telling us all to go and become facilitators or to develop messianic visions.
These days it's telling every other person I meet to go be a facilitator.
But is that the message we're getting, or is that our filtering it through the lens of this American narcissistic capitalist?
Well, I think you nailed that already. It is a particularly Western phenomenon that you do one or two ceremonies, and instead of sitting with the profundity or the healing of that, you immediately want to be the facilitator. And I don't, I can't have a lot of judgment on that. What I can look is the cost and impact of it. But, who's to say that somebody, quote unquote, receives that in ceremony and it isn't their life calling? Maybe they'll be an amazing, fine facilitator at some point. What we've seen so far is that it's fueling a lot of havoc. Yeah. Back to what I was saying, I think what you're alluding to. When I say, it doesn't matter if it's real, the example is what Joe was just sharing. In my experience with my father, it didn't matter if it was real. It completely transformed my life, right? So who can say if it was real? I experienced it as real. It had a profound effect on me that was real. And, I never looked back. My life took off from that point on because suddenly I kind of felt empowered to show up, in a lot of ways.
So I just, wanted to point out that, you had to have a belief that happened.
Exactly.
And that's all, some would say, oh, well, that's a psychosis, or they would put some other label on it, real, not real,
right.
Hallucination, vision. And I think that you really do make the point. Is our life more filled with joy? Are we better, to ourselves and to our loved ones? And are we showing up in a good way? Is this emotional transformation resulting, in better digestion, whatever the case might be. And I think that's the barometer, because I do believe that we could get stuck in this conversation for a long time of trying to figure out, is it real, is it not real, but, how are we being in the world? That's what's real. How are we being in the world?
Yeah, and connections and community, which is what we need right now. And you use the term overthinking. Yeah, we overthink everything in the West. And at the same time, that's part of, if I put it in the lens of the context of the Condor Prophecy / metaphor, that's a gift from the West also, right? Our ability to kind of overthink and really analyze and take something right to its core is also beneficial, right? But again, critical. Yeah, critical. But then again, the balance of that with the heart and the acceptance of the mystery. I'm so glad, Joe, you entered that term, because we can't get around it. There is a mystery, And no matter what anybody says, everybody at one point, if not 24/7, subconsciously, is dealing with the fact that we're mortal, that we're going to die at some point. So that's the profound mystery driving most of our existence, And I think it's interesting to me that the overall kind of consensus in the West is, I think by academics anyway, It's like, okay, well, you die and that's it, and you're done. You know, and I have a hard time believing that they really believe that. I think that's the easiest answer for them to feel like, okay, I've dealt with death, got it in a nutshell, and here it is. Most people are actually walking around kind of like, whoa, death. You know, like what does that mean? You know, and how does it inform my life? And going back to what you were saying, like that's the beautiful thing about plant medicines, in this case ayahuasca, particularly in the context of ceremony and community. It re-enchants you. It brings you back to awe and wonder, and absolutely can give you, I think, a purpose and meaning. You know, life becomes rich again, which we definitely have, a lot of people have lost in the West.
The thing that you mentioned, and I heard you talk about emotional healing, the part that we're coming to grips with the suffering and the woundedness that we all have, whether we were born with it or it's experiential. Right. So, but the key word that you said was forgiveness, right? Like we got to go back and we got to forgive all those that we consciously know that we resent, all those that we subconsciously. So we take the medicine, it opens up the field, and then I think what we see as maybe an entity that's divinely feminine is just showing what we lack the most of. So it's representing this space. Well, like I'm intellectual, like I understand. And there's this divine dance happening, saying, well, if you really want to be balanced, if you want to take the heart and the mind together, you need more feminine. So for those of us that are really highly into that intellectual understanding, we're going to see feminine because that's what we need. We want to move towards that. So whether the plan itself is, how could it be just feminine, right?
Exactly.
It could be. We just know that there's a duality until we integrate our own individual self, and that's what the medicine does. Through its many generations of consciousness, we're seeing through its thought process, through its own logic, its own intellect, which is more, let's say, in line with the real life affirming. Because it doesn't take action, it doesn't move into hurting things, it doesn't, it interacts with its environment. It doesn't allow the thought to change behaviors based on fear. So through the wounded and the healing, the emotional healing, then our intellect can start being trusted.
Oh, that's beautifully put. Thank you for that. And for me, the way I can most, as I alluded to earlier, the way I mostly cognize and accept and like the idea of ayahuasca as Divine Mother is because it's coming from the jungle. So it's the earth in and of itself, this interspecies communication. The idea that the earth actually gave birth to life on the planet puts it in the context of mothers. So I have found, early on I tried to avoid, I had this idea that I didn't want to color or inform someone's experience early on when I was working. Impossible. I had to learn that on my own. Because ayahuasca puts into this highly suggestive state, and you're open. And I realized, oh no, a good facilitator actually knows that, and that becomes your tool, right? The very fact that it suggests, that people are very, very open. The music that we choose to share, the things said, if at all, in ceremony can absolutely guide and put that ceremony into a context. And Divine Mother over the years seems to be the most potent for people. This idea that there is this, ultra caring feminine beingness, right? That actually gives a damn about you and forgives you, right? And loves you and supports you no matter what. That has been really profound healing medicine for people, and maybe that is the reason why. I don't know what you brought up. Please.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on the experiences you may have seen personally with yourself, or more likely with folks who've been in ceremony with you. You kind of made reference to some hospitalizations. I don't know if they're psychiatric or medical in nature. But there's a significant proportion of humanity whose suffering takes the form not of anxiety, depression, and stress like most of us, but what we call now bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And your experience with working with these substances with those people, and or maybe not even knowing you were working with people with those kind of backgrounds, and it becomes clear after you inadvertently trigger a manic or psychotic break.
It's a really big question, and it's one of the topics that comes up in the conferences, and one that I'm always really looking at, and we all are that do this work. Can ayahuasca heal severe mental disorders? We don't know, right? Neil Marshall Goldsmith once said, I think it's in his book actually, Psychedelic Healing. No, actually, if you don't know Neil's work, he has this real basic, simple book that I just love and recommend. It's called Psychedelic Healing. And I was dealing with a guy who was, I realized after a ceremony, was probably to some degree exhibiting, let's just say, schizoid behavior. And I just read Neil's book, and I contacted him on Facebook. And I said, hey, I'm dealing with this guy, and I have a feeling you might be able to support me. Is there any possibility of me calling you? And to my shock and amazement, he's such an amazing guy, he wrote back 5 minutes later and said, how about now? So he called me from New York, and what he said really stuck with me. He said, this is what we think we know, and he's very careful about that. That ayahuasca does not cause schizoid behavior. However, if you are predisposed to it, it's likely to trigger it. But then he said, but the jury is out on whether or not that's a good or a bad thing, that is happening in the context of ceremony. And what I've learned since then is the reality of it is, and Joe, I'm really interested to hear your answer about this, or your response to it. What I err on the side of is that because I don't know, I'm not going to let someone sit in ceremony that has a history of psychiatric problems, or that is exhibiting schizoid behavior, because I know that I'm not capable of dealing with it traditionally, like from a Western perspective, and because I think it not only puts that person in danger, it's likely to put the community, the ceremony, at danger. So until I feel like there's more evidence, both empirically, from my own experience and from what's coming out of the psychedelic, entheogenic community, it's better just to not go there, personally. That's what I feel.
When you say schizoid, I completely got and makes sense what you're saying.
Well, because
is a different,
I just
different
want to
thing.
clarify something. Schizoid means something different. It's a personality disorder that I think what you're referring to.
Yeah, and I kind of use that purposely for this. Thank you for bringing that up. The reason why it's, again, like the limitation of our language. There's this beautiful article most of you have seen. It's called "What a Shaman Sees in a Mental Hospital," right? What is? Yeah, it's really beautifully written. These are the kind of conversations I'm always hoping that we'll engage in, because they're areas that are new and we don't know and we're exploring. What is mental illness? First of all, if you read the big black book, all of us are in there. Right. And every single, I'm looking at them, that's me, that's me, that's me. Totally functional, high functioning Asperger's. That's true, right? You're probably all in the category. Relative to that book, I should be put away, as all of us would be. So what mental health is, what quote-unquote schizoid behavior is, what psychiatric quote-unquote problems are.
Well,
my experience so far.
The specific word schizoid, clinically, it's a different thing than schizophrenia or psychotic.
Right, but just to back up, I totally understand what you're saying, but I'm quoting Neil directly. That's exactly what he said to me. Okay, so that's what I'm saying is, his exact quote was, schizoid behavior doesn't cause it but can trigger it. So that was his quote, right? What I took that to mean is why I'm using all the other terms. He's basically talking about mental health, basically, So those are the terms that he used. But I totally appreciate what you're saying. I just want to be clear, like, they actually aren't my words. What I can say, and I'm anticipating Joe's response there, because I think he probably had the most experience in this area. I really love this concept of spiritual emergency, meaning spiritual emergence. I think in the West, most of what we are identifying as mental dis-ease and mental disorder is actually the result of a culture that doesn't understand spiritual emergence. Right? And surprisingly, to quote Eckhart Tolle, he has this beautiful quote in one of the books. He says, it's almost impossible to wake up in Western culture and not feel crazy because you don't see sanity reflected back to you anyway. I find that relatively true. Most of us have the experience when you start to, and you could say spiritual emergence as conscious awakening. Maybe the safest term is conscious maturity. If you start to mature consciously and kind of start getting some clarity on what's going on, you do, I think, initially feel like you're crazy, right? And people are kind of telling you that you are. And at some point, you meet other people like you and you realize, oh no, the world is fucking crazy. And that's why I'm appearing crazy to everybody. Yeah. So that said, I'm curious, like, the world of mental health and treatment, and what have you found so far?
Well, I think what we're talking about, we can break it down into a lot of different terms, and there's reasons to differentiate and distinguish this word and that word, right. And then there's advanced states where you can't. know what I mean? I tell my friend Rael is a psychiatrist at USC, works in Psych ER. So I'm just like, hey man, this person were they manic, psychotic? I don't know. It was the whole thing. Like it was the whole thing. So we're talking about people. You want to go into that frontier. So for us, for the model that we're using, we need to definitely shy away from that edge. And when we have crossed that edge, and we have, on several occasions, like some where we thought it was a low risk situation that maybe we thought we could handle, maybe in a self-righteous way, or yes, in a self-righteous way, some undisclosed, like found out the guy's got all this,
that's the most common,
antipsychotic pills and didn't tell us, but previously had been coming in from another center and were doing okay there. And then, the odd time that you don't really have any clear history of something, and that still exists.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That doesn't get talked about much because it's pretty rare. And I think there, so like for us, then we ran into an individual, Rael and I met a guy and friends with the guy that was also at World Ayahuasca Conference. He's bipolar and is using ayahuasca for himself in a totally different, and he's using it in a totally different, it's a totally different pathway.
And it's not working. He's having good results.
He's having good success, or he feels good about it. He's doing it like on his own and like once every 2 weeks, like at least with the manic episodes, one thing that we could at least say that is a high risk, especially in our center, was the lack of a sleep cycle, was pushing it over and over again, was the multiple ceremony technique that we're using, the Ricardo-driven style that we're doing. That's kind of like, his idea is like more bang for your buck. They're coming from so far away, we gotta get there.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's too much for people, and so there's this whole thing. So what if you're going to allow for a genuine spiritual emergency to happen outside of like a traditional village?
Right.
Everyone's gonna welcome this family member who is acting psychotic, schizoid, manic, whatever you want to call it, and hold them through that space and be on 24-hour watch and see how long does that take. So we tried it. We tried it in one case where you're like, well, I mean, have we had people need psychiatric intervention afterwards? I know 3 cases and a 4th that should have probably, and so the one case we tried, to shamanize her back down and wait it out. There were signs of improvement, but ultimately she was tortured in the experience. She's feeling the energetic connection that's this manic kind of amazement, where she's at, and you can see signs of like, wow, she really is in a very expanded place.
Right.
But it's tortured in the sense of how dysfunctional it is, and how she can't sleep, and it's getting worse, and just that, between telling me the mysteries of the universe and then begging me, I'm going crazy. Right. Help me, and then we had to shut her down and take her to the psych ward and turn her off. You know what I mean? And just get the meds and that's what brought her back. And the psychiatrist that we work with down there is a guy that drinks ayahuasca sometimes, and he's just like, hey, some of these are just ayahuasca-inspired psychoses that will resolve. We can bring them back down, and we just need to slow the person down again.
Do you differentiate between people that are showing up unmedicated or no history of medication versus people showing up on psychiatric medication?
We don't treat people on psychiatric medication in that center.
Do you have a specific protocol?
We have a specific protocol. Like most of like the centers that are running regular there, to maintain their sustainability, this has to be addressed.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They have to fully detox, and then there's a period of time.
So say somebody has, is medicating psychologically, they want to try ayahuasca, so then they stop for a period of time, you have the history and you take them.
And that would only be somebody with like somebody, in other words, previous hospitalization for manic episode or psychosis is like, no.
Right.
This is not the place for you. This is not the environment for you. Is it possible to address such a thing shamanically? I couldn't say, because we don't do that.
Yeah, and it's, thank you for asking that. And the interesting thing is, Sita and I once had a conversation around the time this conference was coming up. Not exactly about this, but it sparked this for me. Someone once asked me, like, how is it that ayahuasca expands your consciousness? Now, who can actually answer that? But I did say, I go, here's my own experience. Ayahuasca pushes me/us right to the edge of where all of our shit is held together. Our psyche, right? Of how we navigate and think we kind of know what the hell is going on. And then it pushes you right beyond that. In that moment, everybody's crazy, right? So how you differentiate I mean, in every single ceremony, there's going to be one or two people, quote unquote, crazy, if not everybody. Relative to, again, your kind of known comfort zone, I think, of your psyche. So for a lot of people, yeah, it just pushes them over that edge, and for a period of time, they really look like the worst possible case scenario from one's floor in the cuckoo's nest, right? But then ego puts itself back together, and they're fine. And that's the area where, you know, I wonder, as we develop and research ayahuasca, working with people that are dealing with any range of mental health issues, if that's the case, you know, can it push them into the psychosis or, you know, that disturbed, you know, mental place that they're maybe inhabiting anyway or predisposed to, but then in the process of reintegration, can it be put back together better than you were? I don't know. And I think that's kind of what I'm thinking will probably happen if we were to look at it. I don't know.
I can speak to one case of a woman who came to Korea many years ago. I bring groups, and so she was somebody who applied, and it was pretty clear to me from her responses that there was a disturbance. And I consulted with my maestro. There was a lot of conversation, and it was a yes, much to my surprise. And she drank ayahuasca, and she continued to drink ayahuasca for a period of years. And what was very interesting was because she had had a history of hallucinations and had at one point been diagnosed as schizophrenic, that knowing that there would be an entry point into that realm for her wound up being very healing. And it was done under the guidance of a very experienced shaman, and I mean, for me to this day, I continue to track her, and this is 10 years later, and it's just very interesting how healing it was, like knowing I could go there, and I actually know this landscape because I've been there, but it hasn't been so volitional, and in a sense, like I know I'm going to go there, and then when it's over, I can come back. And so it was very, very interesting. Would I say, wow, you have somebody with history of schizophrenia and diagnosed as psychotic and having hallucinations, is that person a good candidate for ayahuasca? I mean, across the board, I think the conventional answer is no. But then you bring in this traditional medicine and somebody who's like, wow, like okay, like I see something here. Can I explain that in medical terms? Can I explain that in this kind of language? No, but then the end result was, for her, it was very healing. And she's no longer being diagnosed as schizophrenic. For what that's worth. It's
a brave new world, I mean, if I'm looking at mental, not all of it, obviously people are chemically and physically imbalanced, from what I understand. But if a good percentage of what we are diagnosing is a psychotic behavior is actually spiritual emergence, then absolutely it seems like ayahuasca or just ceremonial work with entheogens would be helpful. And I have seen it, but I don't know to what degree the people that I saw heal from that had a problem to begin with. Right? So I can't really say.
People should be cautioned away from that.
Absolutely.
The self-righteousness scenario that we're in, you know what I mean? In other words, it's a matter of expertise. If you say, I could do a heart transplant, people want to know, they want to see that you did it before.
Straight up.
So I'm going to give you
that's it right there.
This guy that you mentioned, Mudge, he himself has been diagnosed, been hospitalized with bipolar. And, he's an example, like somebody who not only has he done the work on himself, he's doing one-on-one work with other bipolar patients.
Isn't the Australian guy who posted it?
That's correct. And so, it does seem, I think your intuition is right. I'm a psychiatrist. I'm really interested in seeing your intuition proven right. And, what I can tell you about him, having met him and talked to him in some depth about what he does and how he does it, is, it's not a group thing. It's one-on-one, him and that person. And so he's providing not only just a very knowing container, having been through the landscape that the person he's working with is going through in some way himself.
Yeah.
But also, he does have a specific type of ayahuasca he uses, and he has reasons for it that he's done a whole PhD about, which is he uses the black yahe, not the, I guess it's red or green, or yellow. And a very high chacruna content. So the DMT, you know, the chacruna to yahe ratio is a lot higher than a typical ratio. So, I mean, that's just some of the stuff he told me about. And the black yahe, he said, was specifically different because it has some different chemical component, actually, that has some FRI and whatever.
What you bring up, and probably so we can move on from this particular topic, I was reflecting on how, like, you know, the initial renaissance of the 60s, you know, psychedelics coming in and, you know, people starting to get a glimpse, and then that getting shut down. And then all of the research, and what most of us know about psychedelics came from people tripping, right, and experimenting on their own and reporting back, right? And the advantage we have now is that, you know, now we have this long body of evidence, precedent, of what we think happens, what happens to most people, what you can expect. And now, you know, sanctioned like research again. But still in the world of ayahuasca, I've got to say most of what I know and information I rely on just came from experience, both me experimenting and hearing stories from lots of other people. Until it got to the point it is now where it's just like amazing books that you can go back and read and get like, you know, this is what we know or this is what I've experienced. Prior to that, it was guys like this who just kind of had an intuition and a hunch and experimented and then reported back. And then you get enough of those, you know, 8,000 people doing that becomes research. You know, now all of a sudden you have statistics and good.
Okay, so I'm really glad you brought this up because I healed borderline personality disorder. Going into ayahuasca ceremony last year I came out of it and I was done. It was healed.
Which would bring up the question, were you quote unquote bipolar to begin with?
I was not
borderline.
Borderline personality. Yeah, I was born with it. I was in treatment and
what's the distinction between the two?
It's personality disorder is not linked to like a chemical.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, it's highly emotional.
I thought so.
Yeah, it was
self-harming behavior.
Got it.
Yeah, it was
usually traumatic.
Born out of chronic abuse.
Right.
So it was, I started healing it 14 years ago, and I have been on my healing journey. I stayed away from all psychedelics through that healing journey because I was terrified. Because my psychotic episodes were so intense, I was out of my body watching myself go through these episodes. And you wouldn't look at me now, like nobody would look at me now and say, I can't believe that this is what you went through, that you were trying to break your head open on walls and on, you know, you're doing this extreme self-harm behavior and had no control over my emotions. But when I started healing this, and then I diagnosed myself at 26 years old, and started really like diving deep into like, I need to start navigating and figuring out, and I started my spiritual journey. But it wasn't until like I started really working with spirit about 3.5 years ago after a surfing accident, which I call my awakening, because I'd already been practicing yoga for many years. Yoga was a big part of that because yoga was taking away some of the suffering. But when I started finding like shamanic work, women's circles and sound baths and these healing circles, sweat lodge, and then when I was introduced to plant medicine, I knew I was being called to ayahuasca. And I didn't tell you. I didn't tell you, but I knew I was ready for it. And I said, I don't know. I mean, I knew. I said, I don't know. I knew I had still at that point remnants of my borderline that would still surface at times, but I didn't know what would happen in ceremony. And I took that upon myself to take responsibility. To go into the ceremony knowing it can go one way or another, and I'm going to allow myself to hold my power, because when it comes down to it, when it comes to mental illness, and this is where I'm an advocate for mental illness now, is because we are not the disease. We are not. We hold our power. We have the power to heal it. And I was told by so many doctors, you will never heal your borderline. You're like an alcoholic. Borderline cannot be healed. And I'm like, screw you. It can, because I did it, but it's really fucking hard.
It could be worse.
But coming out of ceremony, and it took me 2 weeks. I mean, you know what I went through. But it took me 2 weeks to integrate into the and back in, and it was like waking up one day, and I was like, oh my God, my borderline's gone. And I haven't experienced any symptoms since it's been done.
Wow.
So I think it is really that, and that's why I'm like thinking about, you know, I get people. I wrote an article a couple of years ago about how yoga helped heal my borderline, and they're asking questions, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to tell them that I started plant medicine, because I don't want them to go into that journey. They're not ready for it. Right. So it's like, you know I'm going to be writing a book about this someday, about the journey of it, because people want to know, like, how do you heal borderline? And I'm like, I did it with spirit. And how do you tell them you did it with spirit? How
do you define it?
How do you define it? Right. So it's, you know, I mean, honestly, it was self-navigation. It was getting connected to source and knowing the moments when I was ready for every step and paying attention.
You bring up something really valuable that one of the things I really like, and is the danger of the resurgence of the Renaissance and popularity of plant medicines, is that it empowers people to do your self-study, do the inquiry, both spiritually, psychologically, and then, you know, take on your health, right? And like this guy, you know, and I love that because we've given so much away, obviously, in the West. And again, I always make a distinction because, you know, it's phenomenal what Western medicine has accomplished. And again, with the challenge is where it meets capitalism, you know, and consumerism. That's the issue we're facing, really. Yeah, you would be highly discouraged from self-diagnosing in that system. But indigenous culture, you know, it's kind of common sense that if you get sick, you got to take care of that and either go see a curandero or you know, go into the forest and pick up some herbs and maybe even use your intuition to figure it out. So that's one of the places where there's a polarity, for sure, right? Yeah. About what's ethical, what's appropriate, what's responsible. It looks very different in different places in the world. Yeah.
I think it's important, like for me, I got off medication. I took myself off my medication. I weaned myself off of it. I've done detoxes. I went into ceremony 2 months before right when I got called to it, I had 2 months to prepare for it. So I was deep into daily meditations. I was deep into clean eating. Like, I made sure that I was ready. Like, and I think that that's a big part of it, is that people, like, I don't think that if people are on medication, they can't. I mean, I just don't suggest it. It's already messing with your chemistry.
Yeah, and I want to get to your question. You bring up something, though, that a friend said to me that really matured my thinking once. He came to ayahuasca because he wanted to get off, I think it was Xanax, that's what you take for anxiety. Yeah. He was, at the time, professional bike racing. He would have these intense anxiety attacks that would just immobilize him. So he came to ayahuasca to heal that. And then I made, this is like 10 years ago, I made some flippant remark about Western pharmaceuticals for anxiety, like him taking that. And he said to me, he goes, I gotta be honest. He said, at the time that I was having those episodes, that saved my life. He was grateful for those medications. It allowed him to function. He just
powerful experience because I have the opportunity to follow a cutting-edge protocol in a retreat in cleansing and mix that with plant medicine. And it was a protocol that I made in Hawaii for 14 days, water fasting, while we were doing all kind of heavy metal collection, IV, color therapy. We were in nature. It was really beautiful. And at the end of the 14 days, of course, we had the opportunity. And actually, it was one of the helpers of Tibet that was there with me, that showed up last minute, and then he was in the retreat and follow the whole protocol. So,
which, by the way, qualifier, you know, we're in a public place, and I think I come across as being really casual in the things that I share about ceremony. I'm actually extremely aware of what it is that I say about when things happen, where, and so forth. So just be mindful the rest of our conversation that,
the point is that I want to share that that my experience, or one of the motivations what I did that was to have the possibility of working with medicine for more integration after that, such a cleansing, right? So what happened is that at the end, day 15, I participated in the ceremony. It was a small space, so finally I didn't drink the medicine, but I actually had an ayahuasca experience without having any medicine, right? Very, very strong. And I could feel the field in the room, like very, very clear. And then I hear like, so the point that I want to give into the conversation to see what you think about it is like how seriously we take the preparation to receive the medicine. I know people that is like, no, I need to drink the medicine monthly to feel good, right? To keep the effect. But I don't know if that's sustainable from the point of view of how much plant do you need to cook medicine for so many people in an entire upscale, willing to transform or facilitate more people for this deep healing.
Yeah, I'm gonna dodge that question because it's too big, and it requires it will require more time, particularly with this awesome guest we have here. What I can say is, the conversation about sustainability in terms of growing ayahuasca is a big conversation in the community right now. And there's a lot of projects happening, intentional planting, wild foresting of the leaf and the vine. And so the jury is out on, well, I'll put it this way, whether or not ayahuasca production can meet the growing Western demand for it is a concern. And you actually also alluded to this idea of like the preparation and all of that. That is such a big subject. The whole idea of dieta, really profound. I think everybody interested in this past should definitely do one. But here's the reality of it, in the years of Santo Daime, because they're not shamanic, quote unquote, I've literally seen Daimistas pull into In-N-Out Burger, people leading the ceremony, a half an hour before ceremony, and have really profound experiences. And then they take an hour break and go out and eat a chicken dinner and smoke pitu, ganja, and come back, drink again, no purging, and still have amazing, profound experiences. And they're talking about St. Michael, so clearly there's some contraindications, even like with food and supplements, all that we want to be concerned about. But whenever people ask me about the dieta, I always say, look, you get what you put in. That's all I can say. If there's a tradition of dieta, my advice is if you feel called, follow it and see what happens. And maybe the next time you do ceremony, just have a smoothie, and see what that's like. Because what I know for sure is that people that haven't followed it have had deep, profound healings. And people that have followed it have had deep, profound healings. So I don't know what to say about that. It would probably ultimately, and Joe, I wish you'd write a book about it. When I research, I would love to find one definitive thing that goes into dieta. Do you cover that?
Stay away from peanuts.
But what I mean is, it's one of the big questions, and it would be really nice from a Western perspective to actually see data. It's like, here's a dieta, and this is why you don't want to have these foods, and this is why you want to do it for 2 weeks.
I think you gotta, the true dieta is a spiritual.
Exactly, that's what I always say.
So then everybody wants to get into the material, and they want to hear about it, and they want the doctor to tell them, oh, you can't do this, it's salt, and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it's like you said, and you had your experience, and that's what you have to share. It's like, hey, you know what? And so that's our experience. We have people do it, and we feel like, we're not doing the weekend ceremony, and we're not doing the one night, church. Mass or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Like we're doing prolonged healing processes with people over weeks, months, and sometimes longer. And so that's our experience, And so we believe in it because we like it and we do it. And I'm as a facilitator, I don't have to diet, because I'm like I'm not going to live on the diet.
Right.
So I've experimented with the whole gamut, myself. Because I'm doing it 4 nights a week down there, and it's like you want to live a little and try this and try that.
Right.
For me, it's better when I diet. I can do it when I'm not dieting, but for me, it is. That's what I can tell you.
And that's been my experience too.
Yeah.
Because of my work in general, being on the dieta all the time is just not practical. But I have noticed when I have been on it, like when I finally get to go to Peru and do an actual like dieta, I notice a difference, you know. But it doesn't mean that I'm not having beautiful experiences when I'm not on it. But there's a level of, you use the word spiritual, I love interchangeable with discipline, like, well, let's say spiritual discipline. If nothing else, taking a week before a ceremony and disciplining yourself, you know, the no sex, no this or that food, whatever it is, it's really a process of preparing yourself to really be into this, get into the space of what it is you're about to take on for your intentions for doing ceremony. If for no other reason, it's worthwhile, you know, I think. And yeah, again, when I've had the luxury of doing that, yeah, it shows up. There's other people I know that are really, really strict about it, and I'm glad they are. You know, yeah, full interview, you know, you can't come to ceremony without a complete, you know, review. They interview you, make sure you're on the dieta before and after. And I know people that have done that have had really beautiful, profound healings. So, yeah. But I want to make, we're running out of time, so I just want to make sure I'm getting everybody. So you're gonna.
Just to finish, yeah. So the point that I wanted to give in this round table was that now there are like research, serious research on psychedelics. Maybe that part should be considered. And I'm just listening to patients that are, you're concerned about patients that have treatments, or you know, if they have been on treatment before, or just given the point of my personal experience that I think, and I've been in ceremonies later, and I didn't ever have the need to drink ayahuasca, so I've naturally become a helper, not a shaman, nothing like that, just a helper. So just saying that maybe, and my protocol was quite extreme, right? So that's why I'm sharing this experience, right? So just letting the table know, so maybe we can look at that part better, and then the needs of ayahuasca for people
and as thank you for that. And as I mentioned, you know, it is a big conversation. You know, as Joe was saying, you know, it's this fine line between to what degree the science, you know, we'll call it that, matters with the diet, versus what we know traditionally works. Regardless of the science, there's a spiritual, let's again call it spiritual discipline for this conversation, that absolutely has been beneficial for people. And I tend to always want to just err on the side of precedent, you know. Yeah.
Along those lines, there's also something else. I've been doing it for a year already, and I never achieved that breakthrough with the Mirasal.
By the way, that was 10 years into my experience.
Or the visuals.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, is there just something that's maybe biological, or what is it that's resistant that you don't get to that?
That's another one of those, we could have another talk about that, particularly with this awesome group of people. It's, you know, it's almost unanswerable. You know, why? Some people drink, and the very first time they're blasted off and have a transformative experience, and the exact same quote-unquote dose, same circumstances, the person next to them is like, I don't believe me. You know, certainly has to do with digestion, you know, our metabolism and enzymes and all of that. And a lot of people have said, well, this is where you're at in your own place in your life in terms of how receptive you are. There's got to be brain chemistry involved. I don't know. You know, it's one of the phenomenons. I think, do you have any response to that?
You know, it's like, in our experience, you know, it depends on a lot of things. And so, like we would recommend, you know, have I seen people go 3 months with like minimal, you know, experience? Yes.
Right.
It's a very low percentage, extremely low.
Very low.
Yeah. So we would take people who've been blocked like that and have success opening them up, like high percentage, over a period of time. So it's like the weekend ceremony, and that's like, it's a, the Shipibos would say, and it's not a guarantee, but that yes, you could, you know, that it would involve a diet period, a cleansing period, advanced shamanic treatment, people to help you clean and clear and open that up, and then look at other lifestyles. So, you know, there may be, there's the biological and all these other things, but I think in a large number of cases you could potentially open up, and it might be the way you're approaching it so far could be a factor as well.
Absolutely.
This is true of the church. I mean, it's not.
That's what I'm saying. That like, and I don't know.
I'm gonna get
I know we'll go to, but that's like I'm saying like going like 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Twice a month.
3 weeks consistently in the diet is very different from that. It's totally in the jungle. I'm just saying, that's my experience, and so it depends. You know, I'm just saying, I'm just sharing my experience, what I see with people. We have a lot of people come, they did it here, they did it there, they did it here, they did it there. And there's, you know, the deeper indigenous shamanic practice perhaps is one pathway to experiment with to try to open that up.
And I will say, along with that, I've definitely known a lot of people who went dedicated, you know, for a full year they were determined, you know, and drinking more and more, and nothing was happening, and all of a sudden, there was that breakthrough ceremony where, boom, and from that point on, every single time they have the experience. So it's a phenomenon based on, like all these factors.
It's like taking all of your antibiotics for some people to get rid of the infection. You got to take it every time all day until it breaks free. For some people, it might be once or twice. For some people, it might be 90 sessions in the jungle. But if you take just a small amount and go back to the culture, that thing that's not healing is growing back and affects it. So quantity and frequency.
Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a psychotherapist, and I work with, I've been a therapist for 21 years, but I've been working in spiritual emergency for about 8 years, and sometimes from psychedelics and sometimes not from psychedelics. And spiritual emergency can definitely be worked with to be a breakthrough rather than a breakdown.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Part of what happens in that process is, you know, how expanded is the person and how contracted is the person. And if a person expands too much, then it becomes much more difficult to work with and bring the pieces back together into a coherent whole, you know. But of course, the too much contraction, that's also not workable. But what often happens with people with spiritual emergency is they're too expanded, you know. And so there's an art to not contracting too much. You know, I tend not to encourage medication, psychotropic medication, because it really contracts you down, but sometimes it is necessary. But what I wanted to speak to also is that the defenses really need to be respected. And we have such an addictive mentality in this culture of just like more.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a process that's happening, even if you're not having these breakthrough experiences or these like visions or whatever, that there is a way that it's working on you. And you know, if we try and blast things open with dynamite, sometimes things splatter all over the place and it becomes not a really good result. So I think there's really something to be said, and I say this coming from a very aggressive-oriented place myself, and also having experienced my own spiritual emergency, which was really, really severe.
Yeah.
That there's something to be said for taking a slow and steady approach. And
Absolutely.
not getting, you know, too caught up in that thing of like, oh, everybody has got this great thing going on, and I want more of that. You know, it's just respecting that there's a, you know. We learn something from the tortoise and the hare.
Because one of the challenges with the popularity is that these days, again, not like when I started, people come to ceremony, you're like, okay, I'm ready for this to be totally blown out, because they've been watching videos, you know, and of course those videos are showing you like the most dramatic, you know, and you know, a few of the Kundalinis I've worked with have said, yeah, it's one of the things with people in the West, you know, they come expecting drama, and then we have this sense of responsibility to give it to them. You know? So much so that some of them, or you know, let's add some Toei and make sure they have a really powerful experience. You know, so we're influencing the approach to ceremony. I think there is this kind of subtle responsibility or anxiety amongst facilitators that you want to really deliver this quote-unquote ayahuasca experience, when in reality, some of the most profound healings I've had that were like actual life, long lasting in my life were the subtle ones. Where kind of I was sitting there the whole night, but then this one thing came, no visions, you know. But then all week long I was like, wow, I really have to implement that. That was like the big thing, actually, right? Oftentimes, which is what you're alluding to, what I have found is huge dramatic ayahuasca or any psychedelic visionary, you know, experience does not equate to integration or even like benefit, you know. Oftentimes people that have had the most, you know, dramatic, blown out in their retelling of their experience, nothing actually got integrated from that experience, and it didn't cause a shift, actually. It was just this amazing ride, you know, and then they were back to the racket the next day, you know. So I don't know, there's a lot to be said for what you're saying, you know, like just trust the process and be willing to. One thing I do, my feeling about ayahuasca is if you're gonna take it on as a path, meaning for some period of time. Yeah, meaning the experienced junkies that we are in the West, don't just go to the one ceremony and expect to have your life blown apart. Actually decide, like, I'm going to try this ayahuasca thing. And then whatever that leads in terms of it, that's why I love going to Peru and actually going to a center. Like, you know, to be in a really safely held container with experienced people where you can repeatedly work with ayahuasca and have it be supported. For somebody that's been feeling this quote unquote calling, I think that's a much better approach than the quote unquote weekend.
And not to be dynamited out, you know, I mean, I understand, but to like a slow, steady, careful.
Right.
Because, you know, there is that other side of like the longing for that experience, you know, and that's, you know, that's okay too, you know, that you're curious and you want to see in, and you're curious, like, is what's blocking, you know, does something need to be addressed that would make it easier for me to have this experience, you know, possible. So, you know, I think there's that side of it, you know, that there is a whole other world of it in the longer dieta, in the, you know.
Yeah, it is. Lastly, I know we're going to have to close. I love this concept of study. You know, I got this from the Santo Daime, actually, that everything is a study. You know, and the idea of even this, you know, aspect of our conversation, full dieta, full immersion, retreat center versus weekend, you know, it's all a study. It's a study for the community participating. It's a study for you individually. You know, again, people have gone to one ceremony and then changed their entire life the next week. They got what they needed to do. Other people, it's like a full year and then the big breakthrough comes, you know. Who can say? You know.
Are you familiar with Jordi Riva's work?
No.
Out of Spain? Because he developed a way to freeze dry ayahuasca, put it in a capsule.
Oh, I
form.
did. Yes, I am familiar.
Yeah. So he's working from the extreme perspective.
Correct me if I'm wrong, part of the impetus for that is to find a way to kind of control.
Exactly.
Like,
so you control the dose, you know, what's in each pill,
exactly.
As much as possible. Because you know, the study I did in Peru with Dennis and Charlie, but no control over any of that, you know, dose or anything like that. But so this is the other end of the other extreme end where they have, you know, it's very Western controlled, double-blind study and all that sort of stuff. And he's been getting some good results from that. And there's no Icaros, no shaman. It's in a sterile hospital environment. And I have mixed feelings about that. I as a scientist, I think that's extremely smart, brilliant way to do it, because you know, from that paradigm, you want to control everything except for the one thing that you're manipulating, and you're pretty sure that it's because of this thing that I've been manipulated. But on the other hand, I'd feel really sad if they found out that the shamans and the Icaros and all that sort of stuff are just kind of not as important as everyone thinks they are, and that the context of set and setting. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that, and like if this goes in this direction with the capitalistic Western paradigm of encapsulating these things, sooner or later it's going to be and these things will be on the market. Maybe Joe and Rael can administer it and so forth, and I'd be interested to hear your.
My response to that is, as I said earlier, absolutely you could go take ayahuasca by yourself, like some people do, like this guy you're talking about. And you could control it's interesting, it seems to me if you freeze-dried it, I tend to think you'd still be up against the problem that when it's made, it varies so dramatically. So I don't know about that, but you can't separate, well, relative to the benefits that I have seen in my own life experience of the last 20 years, you can't separate the medicine from the ceremony in terms of what people have been experiencing and getting benefits from. And I've looked at that from every different angle, and it is the community aspect, it's the icaros, or in Western, the songs, the lyrics. The set and setting in that context really is everything. It's so synergistic. Mm-hmm. And there's this period of time, I have to be careful how I word this one. There was a period of time I was leading ceremony, and every batch was so different that I couldn't lead the ceremony unless I tried it first. So I'd have to, gosh darn it, it's Wednesday night, and I'm going to have to do this medicine, so I know what the hell I'm doing on the weekend. And it never equated, because I was doing it by myself. It was always a completely different story when I was like, oh, I thought this was a mild one. Right? So that just taught me over that couple-year period of needing to work that way that, I rely heavily on the curandero or the facilitator, which is why I'm always telling people, you're never just, Sita and I alluded to this, even if you're getting hopping from somebody, right? You're never just receiving the medicine. You're also always receiving the facilitator, period, right? To some degree.
On the other hand, though, they did research back in the 50s with alcoholism and the way they'd strap them down and just the worst setting you can imagine, but they were still getting some positive results.
I think
so there's something very powerful about the medicine itself.
Yeah, and I don't doubt that that's a possibility. That's why I phrased it as ayahuasca as I have seen its benefits over the last 20 years of my own life. You haven't been able to separate the two. Yeah.
I just want to make a little postscript to that. You know, we talked earlier about people having one or two experiences and then saying, you know, I want to be a facilitator. I also, you know, I'm so grateful to all of my teachers and all the people who have like walked this path diligently and honestly and truly. But I also want to, you know, call out, you know, the efficacy of the plants themselves and the relative safety of the plants themselves, because there's so much ayahuasca being poured that if it were unsafe and it were completely dependent on the facilitator, we would be hearing stories left and right of everybody being rushed to the emergency room and people, you know, off their rockers, and we don't. And I think that's a testament to the plants themselves. So,
and at the same time, we do.
I mean,
they haven't been dangerous.
But the thing is, I think in proportion to the number of people that are actually working.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right. And at the same time, I believe that, you know, the spiritual component, the traditional component, the, you know, plant intelligence component, the stewarding of this medicine in a specific way, you know, is really important. But I do think that we will see benefits from this laboratory extraction, just by virtue of the vine itself and the monoamine inhibition and the antidepressant. Like, I mean, that it's going to happen, and I don't think it's a bad thing. That's going to be one goal. I don't think it's going to detract from.
I agree.
Yeah, they're going to be the first ones that have access to the sickest of us that seemingly are not responsibly allowed into a clinical setting. So if I get a call from a mother or father says my son is extremely sick, we tried everything, he's been at mental institute and nothing else has worked, and we want to try this medicine. So where do we go when we talk about it? So well, first of all, he's got to be off the meds, he's got to be in this condition, but you've got, nothing else has worked for this guy.
Yeah.
You've got desperate people. So the first place it would be going is to a medical environment where they give them the pill and they can kind of control the environment. However, what I believe and what I believe you believe and what I believe you believe is they're really going to be healing. They've got to be in a ceremonial container with people that can hold space and then extend past the breakdown, which is what I think we started the conversation started with you, which is it took years to prepare, and it took you having to do all of these holistic, full body, somatic, mental preparations, whether it be dieta, in our cases, or someone severely, you know, that challenged, that we're not going to get the healing that we need unless it's really this comprehensive thing. So if you're trying to do the pill, it'll get us into it. But I believe it's going to come back to the shamanic practice. Community is going to go.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. And I want to clarify, you know, when I said, I was trying to clarify that you can't separate the medicine from the ceremony as I have seen it working in my lifetime, because the predominant medicine that people have gotten, in addition to, you know, ayahuasca, has been the community and the music, which is really, by the way, more my area of expertise. Sound healing, the effects of music on everything from the nervous system to our neocortex is like, that's really where I live and have a passion about. So it's because of that context that I say you can't break the two, because I've seen what happens when you bring them together. I don't doubt, absolutely, that if somebody took, you know, dried ayahuasca capsule, they'd get benefit. I just trust that medicine so much, you know. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the healing that I've seen. What was that?
Treatment-resistant depression has been cured, at least for 2 weeks, in the lab setting with those dried capsules. Absolutely. And no community.
But that's, you know.
I'm just saying, it has been shown, you're right.
Exactly.
It's true. You know, and it's just like, fine, you know. The muggles, you know, they want to have their
muggles are good to muggle.
Exactly. They want to have their day.
They just gotta give them space.
I like just pretend, you know, but it's like, but then there's other people, you know, and it's like, that's great, the medicine's great, but it's like, just because that's true doesn't mean the other one isn't true.
Exactly.
And then it's like, because if that's true, because this is what they do. Oh, here's a paper, here's a paper, here's a paper.
Exactly. So this must be true.
Shut up, you shut up. And the guy's like, man, when he's saying to me, you know, this just happened to me, like not too long ago. You know, I'm singing to the guy, you know, he drank 7 times at this other place, no effect. He did this somewhere else, so comes in, oh, okay, let's give it a little more. How are you doing? You feel it? Yeah, I'm starting to feel it. Hey, come on, let me sing to you, you know. So then I'm starting to sing to him about what I know his problem is, all this violence and all this stuff, and I'm following my visions, I'm seeing the thing and doing the thing, and I see him kind of like, ooh, you know, whoa. And now he's puking his brains out, you know. And then all of a sudden, like, I shift gears, now I'm singing about something else, and then all of a sudden, he like, and then, whoom, you know, goes unconscious, you know. So then we got to help him up and deal with him and figure it out what happened. He's all screwed up, you know, and try to, oh no, what happened, you know, and get him settled down. And then like the subsequent story of this mystical phenomenon that happened in his life. I'm just saying, you're going to talk to him and try to convince him that it didn't happen to him.
Right.
This thing that happened, this connection that happened with his girlfriend at the exact same moment when he woke up, he sees 10:45 on the stove, and then she sends him this letter the next day. At 10:45, I sent you this prayer, which is exactly about what he was going through at that time. And I'm just saying, it's like, that's, you know, just respect the man. You know what I mean?
And as you said,
respect the man.
the
I
mystery.
respect the study. You know what the study's about. You know what we're trying to extrapolate out, the same kind of thinking in the same kind of way, so we can rest on our laurels and say, you know, hey, well, we built it out that way.
Right.
Which is fine, and that's the whole reason that study's designed that way, so that it can pass a peer review that's been established by the current academic politics. If they change the academic politics, then it could be just like that.
Right.
That's what it is. You know what I mean? Because they have something, it's like, you're allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. You know, and so there's all that thing, but then still, the truth is that people have their personal experiences. And so we honor that, you know, because that's a huge part of the healing. And some of those personal experiences involve interaction with the shaman or the facilitator or the support of the community, and they're so crucial, or they're so beneficial maybe in addition to. And so that's the healing arts, you know, and so we respect the healing arts just as we respect science.
That's a beautiful place to start to move into a closing.
Well, I was going to say, in relative to what you're saying, it's very interesting because I've had 11 journeys. The most profound mystical one that I had was the second one out in Joshua Tree, in the desert. About 30 people in a circle. We drank, nothing else. We just laid down. No sound, no ceremony, no anything, no connection. And it was the most mystical, profound experience that I've had, and it changed my life.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just like, I mean, we don't know what we don't know.
And there's the thing I think Joe has been alluding to, you know, this idea that there's a right way. I always just say there's just different medicines in every approach. There's a different medicine in every setting. I've gone to ceremonies that have been extremely strict, sit in the dark, don't touch your body, don't make a sound, and in fact, don't fidget. You know? And I hated every minute of it. But what happened was, it basically removed all of the things that I would know, this way back when, all the things that I would normally do to distract myself from going in got removed. Right? So I was able to go really deep and just deal with all the uncomfortable stuff I didn't want to look at. Conversely, though, you know, ceremonies where there's community and music, and people have had completely, you know, transformative breakthroughs because those triggers were there. Yeah. So it depends. I wanted the thing I mentioned about being black, because it sounds like a funny thing to say and leave hanging. I actually did a talk for Awareness Project. It was actually called Ayahuasca and the Racial Divide. I was going to Burning Man like 9 years ago for the first time. And as amazing as that was, I'm walking around like, where are my people? You know? And this is one of the phenomenons, you know, these quote-unquote transformational festivals. I'm like, yeah, they're fantastic, and they filled predominantly with young white kids, you know. And I'm looking at that like, you know, are my people not interested? You know. Then we have ayahuasca, obviously, taken from dark-skinned indigenous people, brown people, you know, and made popular. There's nothing wrong with any of that for sure. What I was looking at is, why aren't my people showing up? Well, you know, in interviewing and kind of researching and asking them, it's because they're not invited, put it that way. And what I mean by that is, they don't see themselves in those circles, right? To their credit, Lucidity Festival this year, we had this conversation last year, and I said, look at all your media, you know, and sure enough, their big posters and on their website had a bunch of predominantly white kids, and there was one person of color and an Asian girl over in the corner. So when you're black and you see this poster, the message you get is, oh, this isn't something black people go to, right? So that's what I mean by not invited, not encouraged. And turns out it was the same with ayahuasca. Well, it's complicated. One is a taboo. As you know, drugs, in quotation marks, have destroyed African American communities, and to some degree systematically. We won't get into that conversation. And because of it, the communities have been ripped apart, and as you know, the vast majority of young, healthy black men are in prison, mostly on drug charges or related, right? So there's that taboo around it. Also, black people aren't involved or invited into these kind of progressive transformational festival scenes where a lot of these conversations and access entrance points are happening, right, to the entheogenic community. But the main one is, it turns out, is because they don't see other black people doing it. And I was like, aha. So when Amber Lyon contacted me about doing that interview with her, I said I will do it under one condition. We talk about black people and the benefits of it and so she made sure that was happening. And bingo, the very next week, and ever since then, black people are contacting me from all over the country saying, where can I do ayahuasca? I heard your talk about your father, and you're right, I think this could help the trauma in our community. So until there was a face on it that they could see, it was something other people were doing, or they weren't hearing about it at all. So that's what I meant when I said the main reason I do, or I've decided to be public with my quote-unquote work, or at least interest in this subject, is because absolutely this is going to help heal the trauma that people are still suffering from. And I don't care what anybody says, post-traumatic slave syndrome is real. I lived it growing up. So other cultures have to have it too, And since it heals me so profoundly, I know that it has to be healing for other people and the culture at large. That's it.
All right.
Thank you for this opportunity. I just want to share, the opening kind of talking is great. I really love doing this because you brought up, there's so many things we can't say in an academic setting. We can't just kind of share our feelings and impressions. When we get together like this, we can just have honest counsel and conversation about what we're all experiencing. And it's where I really I think the cutting edge of actually the whole plant medicine community and the research moving forward. It's starting though in these kind of community councils, and that's why it's so valuable. Yeah. Thanks so much for being here. It's so great. Thank you. I can't wait to dive into this. I was determined to get in bed until I got here.
You got your purses.
More copies.
Yeah, I'm actually working with filmmakers.
Yes, I will do, my man.
What are the downs of like the voices? Yeah, so far they love the idea.